All right, so France now has a foothold in the Americas. Now, it probably would be a little more accurate to say they had a toehold in the Americas. Okay, they were not a major power or anything like that. They didn't have large numbers coming in like we talked about, but at the same time, at least they were there. And they were going to try to expand. They were going to try and grow New France into a viable overseas colony. Okay, now one of the good things about Canada was the fact that they had at least one major natural resource that was in high demand in Europe. Believe it or not, it was the beaver. Now, the reason beavers were so important at this point in time was you got to think about the, you know, area in which they were thriving. Okay, it's fairly cold. They're having to go through frigid water, things like that, and as a result, the fur, the pelt are much thicker, much heavier. And this was very popular in Europe for a couple of reasons. It meant, warmer clothes, coats, things like hats, even. And essentially, this was like finding money on the ground. Now, for the British, for example, in Virginia, they did have the cash crop of tobacco they were able to send back to Europe. In New France and Canada, they were using beaver pelts, okay? And there was high demand for this. And whenever you have high demand for something along those lines, you're going to see a large number of people working to try and get it. This was not exactly simple work, but it was fairly easy in regards to, the cash they were getting for it. Now, the beaver hunters in New France were referred to as the coureurs de bois, okay, the runners of the woods. Okay, and as they went around North America, President Canada and the United States, they gave a number of place names. Okay, you had different areas where they're going to possibly set up trading posts at one point. Forts could end up being there, things along those lines. And they named a lot of stuff. Now, we still use a lot of these names to this very day. We may not think of them as French terms or French words, but they actually are. For example, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I guess the actual pronunciation would be like Baton Rouge or something. I don't speak French, so I don't know. But Baton Rouge, that translates as red stick. So literally, Baton Rouge, Louisiana is red stick, Louisiana. Terre Haute in Indiana, that means highland. And Des Moines, in Iowa, you've got basically some monks. So you have these coureurs de bois going around, and they're naming various things throughout North America, and as a result, they had an impact not just on New France at that point, but also on down the road to this very day. Now, it wasn't just the runners of the woods that were doing the hunting. Remember, we talked about in regards to Indian-French relations, they went through and tried to make sure that you had pretty good, relations going on. We talked about the fact that the French had sided with the Huron against the Iroquois, and in some respects that had worked well, in other respects not so much. So in this case, the voyageurs are also going to recruit Indians to go out and hunt beavers as well. The more people you have doing the job, the more beavers you're going to have coming in, and the more money you're going to make. So as a result, they hired a bunch of the different Indians. Now the problem was that a lot of the Indian population had been decimated by disease. Now there are two schools of thought on this. One argues that this was an intentional genocide brought over by Europeans. The other argument is that since we didn't have a good understanding of disease and germs and stuff like that at the time, this was an unintended result of people meeting. Whenever you have people exposed to a pathogen to which they have no natural antibodies, it's going to take a while before those start to develop. You'd even see this in the Civil War when you'd have a large number of guys together in a relatively confined space. You might see things like measles run rampant. So in this case, you did have disease wipe out a sizable portion of the Indian population. Now, was it genocide? Was it accident? I leave that up to you. You can do your own research and make your own decision. But because of the French that were hunting the beavers, because of the Indian allies they'd hired to help hunt the beaver was hunted nearly to extinction. Now, we don't normally think about the beaver close to extinction, but it literally was. You can think about it the same way that buffalo were almost hunted to extinction after the Civil War on the prairies. So it was one of those things where there was a bountiful supply at the outset. It was dwindled down to little, and we did manage to recover from that. But still in all, it wasn't the heyday it had started off to be. Okay. Now, also at this time, you have French missionaries, Catholic missionaries, coming in to New France to try and convert the Indians. In this case, in some respects, they had great success. In other respects, it went very poorly. Again, this is one of those issues where you can go through and do all the research you care to, and you can make your own decision on that. But it was one of the attempts by France to spread religion. Now, to thwart English settlers from pushing into the Ohio Valley, Antoine Cadillac founded the city of Detroit, the city of Straits, in 1701. Now remember, you got to think about what was going on in North America as a big chess game to the European powers. Okay, you have Britain, France, and Spain as the predominant factors in this. And so France is trying to make sure that they're able to block the British from getting into especially the Ohio Valley. And they're doing so by starting to set up some forts and cities and things like that. Detroit was one of them. As you can see, that was 1701, so Detroit's now been there for over 300 years. It was an important aspect of New France to try and push the frontiers to expand where New France was actually going to be. Now, what we have as the state of Louisiana, for example, that was founded in 1682 by a guy named Robert de La Salle. This was not to halt the British, but to try and thwart the Spanish, trying to make sure that they weren't able to expand unchecked in the area around the Gulf of Mexico. Now, Robert de La Salle wanted to come back to this area later and actually, expand and fulfill his dreams, but when he did come back in 3 years, he didn't land in the right spot. Instead of landing in French Louisiana, he landed in Spanish Texas. Things went downhill for him from there, to the point that in 1687, the men under his command mutinied and executed him. So didn't go so well, but we still have Louisiana to this very day. Now think about the Midwest, okay? We're looking at what's called the Illinois country. Okay, the French established a bunch of forts and trading posts there, places like Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes, okay? This is, again, that chess game we were talking about. The idea that they want to expand where they are to counteract the British expansion. And they're using this to basically create the garden spot of their North American empire. This is going to be the center of New France. This is where they think they're going to be able to do the most good for France. Now, again, things are going to change once we get into war, but at this point in time, they had made the effort and they were starting to see at least some results.